Welcome back to the Eye of the Observer podcast, the podcast of the Observer news staff. Today we're going to be interviewing Mr. Dom D. Palermo and welcoming our editor, Indy Wilson, for the first time on the podcast. My name's Vanch, and I'm joined with Eric, and let's dive right in. So, Dom, what's your position for the Observer?
Hi guys, my name's Dominic D. Palermo. I go by Dom, and I'm the editor-in-chief of The Observer.
And what do you do?
I basically manage and oversee all of our writers and reporters, photographers, social media people, the podcasters, Vanch and Eric, who are interviewing me right now, and I make sure they're doing their jobs. They're getting out there in the field, interviewing people for stories. Their photographs are sound compositionally and ready to be put online, and that our social media is actually bringing our stories out to people so that we have multiple facets of news outreach.
Now, basically, you're saying you're a glorified hall monitor as well, then, right? Because we do mess around on the podcast. If you don't know, we do mess around in different episodes. But I'm just asking you, what's the craziest thing you've seen in the Observer this staff year? I guess.
With the staff?
Yes, with the staff.
Oh, that's tough. I'm gonna have to think about that for a second.
Go for it. Why don't you take a minute to think about it, and I'm gonna move on to Miss Indy Wilson. So, Indy, you're gonna be editing this podcast. Please don't cut anything out. That's obvious. But what? Just tell the audience, what do you do?
I'm the digital editor, so I'm like in charge of the newsletter. So I make sure that comes out every 3 weeks.
Dom, what is the craziest thing you've seen on The Observer?
I think the craziest thing I'd say is like the amount of awards we've been winning since I've been here. So I've been here for 2 years, and it's just been really great to see how our staff has blossomed and grown from people who don't necessarily know a lot about writing or photography, and that includes myself. I was not a writer or anything close to an editor up until not that long ago, but I think the craziest thing is just the improvement that we see in our staff with their work, and then the direct response to that work, which is shown in our awards, which are judged by local professionals and national professionals at a state and national level.
So, with most people asking, and basically we're going to do a future episode on this, but can you give us a quick, brief insight on the process here on The Observer, basically from start, meaning pitching ideas, to finish, getting it out on our website?
Yeah, so we have, well, I guess as staff, we're always constantly thinking of ideas. As journalists, it's our job to notice our world around us, and primarily our world right now is Elgin Community College and its surrounding areas. So I think just everyone being constantly aware of the things that are going on brings us closer to a finalized story when it comes to pitch day. So pitch day is when we bring those ideas that we've constantly been thinking about and noticed around us to the actual whiteboard where we assign stories to people. Once those stories are assigned, we go out and do them, turn them in usually on a Thursday, and by Monday night, that following Monday night or morning, we have a newsletter out, which Indy sends out.
Now, I mean, I don't know much about the newsletter and how it gets sent out or anything, or maybe the statistics behind it. I know earlier today, Nick was talking to me and Eric about it, but I think we are sending the newsletter around to like 19,000 student and faculty combined, and around 10,000 is actually actively looking at our work. What do you think that number will triple in the time or in the next like 5 years, give or take?
I think that really depends on ECC's enrollment. I think a big piece of that is just how many people are starting to come to ECC, because our readers are primarily Elgin Community College staff and students. However, I have an idea to bring more community members from Elgin, St. Charles, the Kane County area, the border towns that come to Elgin Community College, their parents, their family members, their relatives, their friends. I want to bring them to the Observer and allow them to sign up for this newsletter too. So I think that could potentially happen. Now, do I know if it'll be triple? I don't know, but I'd like to see some improvement in that aspect.
Now, we're all working on strings. Dom, I'm pretty sure you're working on the...
I'm working on a couple different stories. So I was with Shane Dell, Vias, one of our other reporters. On Thursday, we were in the B181 room she was talking to some manufacturing execs from around the area because ECC is building a new manufacturing center over where the old Colonial Cafe used to be. And then I was just there to photograph that breakfast with all the execs. And then Shane Dell talked to Congressman Raja, who donated $936,000 to that new manufacturing center. And I was just there photographing it. I also photographed our daycare on campus, and they went to the dental assisting program center where they got their teeth looked at by the dental assistant trainees and students and got to learn about dental hygiene.
So you do photo galleries, you do sports, you obviously do news, you try to do human interest as well. What's one category that you think as a staff, where else can we kind of fill up, the table with stories?
I think we have a good picture of every kind of story. We have a lot of news, a lot of feature, a lot of photo galleries, some decent amount of sports because there's not a lot of sports on campus for us to be covering. But I think just as a staff, any newspaper would say you need more news because that's our whole job. We're supposed to find the news and report on it, and we just want to make sure we're relevant in content to our audience members because if they don't want to read it, then why are we writing it?
It's true.
That is really true.
It's hard to find news stories, though, in my opinion.
It can be. It's an instinct you definitely have to train and learn. But it just comes from constantly being aware of what's around you and talking to people on a daily basis, not necessarily interviewing, but just constantly being around and aware.
Right. Anyways, we've been sticking around Dom too much, like asking him too much questions, but you're the one who sends out the newsletter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you edit it as well?
Yeah.
What's the process behind it?
It's actually very long. I have to think of like little captions for each story. And then I have to pick out what picture to put, and then I have to send it to Nick and make sure it's good. And then Nick tells me that I forgot like a couple of things a lot.
So do you mess up frequently?
I've only done it twice so far, so yeah, I'm still a rookie.
What about you, as editor-in-chief, when you're editing all the stories, do you mess up? Do you find yourself making mistakes?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think it's foolish for anyone to say they don't make mistakes. Big news publications have many editors for a reason. It goes through at least 3 editors most of the time when you're publishing something. Also, I just wanted to recenter us and see not just about the process, but just some of the fun things we talk about and do with the Observer. I would just want to talk about some of the things that I've worked on in the past 2 years being here.
Mm-hmm.
I think I came in with some sort of photojournalism instinct from high school, and I was passionate, and I was a little, what's the word, hard-headed? Not hard-headed. I think I just maybe thought I knew everything or knew a lot, but in reality,
A know-it-all.
Yeah, a little bit. But as I started getting closer with Nick before the school year even started, I started realizing I needed to learn more about captioning and more about reporting instinct, not just taking the photo, because taking the photo is a very small percentage of being a photographer. And then as the semester and year went on, I became the photo editor, then editor-in-chief. So I not only had to learn how to caption and report while taking a photo, I had to learn how to report and write and edit the following semester, which was a lot. But all that being said, it's just helped me grow a lot in this career path that I'm working towards. But I just wanted to bring up some of these things that we do and talk about at the Observer. One of my favorite stories this past year has been a profile story on Dennis Biddle, a former Negro League baseball player. He's a truly incredible man. He's 87 years old, and he's still fighting for the rights of, I think, about 37 Negro League baseball players who are still living, who are all pretty old, and they have not much money or pensions. And I think that story really helped launch me further along in my reporting and writing career because I hadn't put that much attention or time into a story before. The story ended up being about 4,100 words, and I was just really proud of it, so I wanted to talk about that.
That's an entire essay. I'm just saying that's a finals paper. Put it in perspective. That's a 12-page, double-spaced, MLA formatted paper that you wrote for one story. And after editing, how many words was it down? Was it still 4,000?
Yeah, the editing, I edited a lot, so I did 2 drafts of this. I sent it to one of my local a local sports writer who I'm close with, and he even edited it. And it still was at 4,100 words, and it took a lot to try and get that down, but it would have probably been closer to 5,000 had I not really trimmed things down.
So you're telling me in one story you put hard work and dedication into almost a 24-page double-spaced MLA formatted story.
Yeah.
What was the whole process behind the story?
Well, 2 weeks before the end of the semester, I was still out an idea for a story for Nick's class. I told him I had an idea. Nick is our advisor, by the way, for the Observer. And I was watching a movie one day called All the President's Men about these two journalists. And I got this idea to interview this baseball player that I met years ago at a baseball card convention. And I ended up calling him the next day. He didn't really respond. I guess this might have been 3 or 4 weeks before the semester, but him and his wife didn't end up responding until about 2 weeks later. And so then I made the decision to drive up to Milwaukee 2 weeks before the end of the school or the semester year. And I was like, you know what? I have probably about a week to write this story. And I know it's going to be really long because he's 87 and it has to be about his whole life. So I started reading his book that I had bought from him 9 years ago at this baseball card convention just to prepare myself for this interview. And I interviewed him, drove the 2 hours back home during rush hour, and just started working a couple days later with everything else going on, finals.
This is what I'm getting at here. You drove 4 hours in total to Milwaukee to get an interview for a really good story, by the way. I did read it. I posted on our Instagram and Facebook about it. Check it out, by the way. And it was a hit, actually, within the communities. The analytics were skyrocketing on both. So what do you think? Like, do you feel that as a photojournalist or as a journalist, however you want to call yourself, do you feel like your stories are making an impact some way or shape or form on our student body population, on the community out there? Because you're not from Elgin, are you? You're from, what, St. Charles?
Yeah.
So do you think that your stories are impacting the community here and the student population here?
I think for sure they are. I think the motivation behind the Dennis Biddle one and the reason I worked on it for so long was because I wanted to release it for Black History Month. Our student body is very diverse, and our school administration highly emphasizes that. I think, too, not just the Dennis Biddle story. That wasn't my only story that I've ever done, but I've worked on numerous news stories since the past year and a half when I became editor-in-chief. The most recent one, I think, was the racist Zoom bombing, when a couple of people who we don't know who they are still hopped on a Zoom for, I think that was a BLM.
It was a magic, like BLM type of presentation.
Yeah, it was a BLM presentation, and some racist people hopped on the Zoom and just started spewing hate, which ultimately ended the Zoom and restarted the meeting a little bit later. Myself and Shane Dell, who I mentioned earlier, her and I worked on this story, and I think it really informed the student body of what happened because it wasn't all that clear. And I think it's our job as journalists to make that clear to people. Nick always says people don't necessarily read the whole news story. They read one to two lines, and then they're kind of done. So I think as long as we get our point across soon, we get our point across at all, we're having an effect on the student body. Same thing with the COVID-19 stories I did, where there was a little bit of a kerfuffle, I guess, between administration and the teachers union last year, but it was all sorted out. I think it was important that it was also reported on because the student body and the staff it was unclear whether they were supposed to be wearing masks or whether they weren't. And I think when in that world, when we were constantly hearing things about COVID from all sides of every spectrum, we were all confused. And I think by writing that story, while it was hard and it was one of my first news stories, it helped bring clarity to our audience and student body and ECC community.
Now, I'm shifting the focus away from Dom for a second to Indy. Indy, you do, I'm pretty sure, at least to my knowledge, you run the TikTok account for the Elgin Observer, right?
Yes, I do.
And one of the videos, I think it was one of the first ones, could you explain what happened in that video when we all started shouting Eric because he wouldn't introduce himself on camera?
That's
Well,
a lie.
Yeah, I think you just explained it. We had to speak for him.
I was already speaking, though. Was I not?
No, I think you were stammering. I mean, Dom, I don't know if you remember, but it wasn't Eric just stammering, going "Kup, pup, 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 pup,"
I mean,
because he couldn't speak clearly
if you
on. His name was Eric, and he's
okay,
a staff writer
If
for
you
the
go on the
Observer.
video, you stuttered multiple times, and then you kept looking to the side. You weren't even looking straight at the camera. So I think my part was
least-
better.
At least I said something though. That's kind of like the
At
main
least I had the whole
important
room
thing.
chant my name.
I think that TikTok did a good job at showing all of our personalities.
Did it
Shy.
do? Did it introduce a lot of people? Was it giving exposure to the Observer?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it really did. Trust me, so many people saw that
Mhm.
TikTok. It's not
Like
funny.
hundreds.
It's horrible. Eric, look, this popped up. You're in this. I'm like, where'd
Yeah.
you get that? It's scary.
And this is like just a follow-up question for Dom here. Dom, moving from social media into a different category, do you think social media is exposing the Observer to new audiences beyond Elgin?
Yeah, I think so for sure. We have. I can't speak directly because I don't know exactly who we're reaching. I haven't checked in a little while since you took over the social media. It became a lot for me to edit, do my own work, do my work outside of school, do my schoolwork, and run our social media. But I think I have seen a lot of growth in who we're reaching out to. I think a large part of that too is not just our social media, but it's also the idea that we're going out not just at ECC but around its community into those district towns for the people that where the students come from, and just making our name known. When I was in St. Charles for the pumpkin recycling event, a lot of people didn't know who I was working for, which was us, the Elgin Observer, but they knew of me from my high school because it was a friend's mom who actually who actually was at this pumpkin composting event. And I just photographed it because I thought it would be an interesting story, and it was. People were just chucking pumpkins into a dumpster, and visually that's pretty interesting. So I think just getting that name out there, all of us just with word of mouth, like Kip, one of our reporters, went out and they reported on Ghoulish Mortals, a local business in St. Charles, and that got a lot of traction online because a local St. Charles news site blasted it. Or I don't know if it was a news site or what. But
It was
The
an
tab.
event side. It was just like saying, "Oh, things are in St. Charles," and quite literally, as soon as we published it, it went onto the website, and by the next morning, it was like 1,800 views,
right.
and that was a huge booster. And I know you mentioned that you didn't have the current analytics. I haven't pulled up here. For our Facebook, just saying, 67% that see it are women, and 32% are men. And the top cities, Elgin, obviously, it was Chicago and South Elgin coming into second and third. But the top countries, and this is what kind of is weird, 97.9% is from the United States. Okay, that's not weird. But 1.2% is from Mexico. And then you have a little bit of like those one or two users from India, Canada, and Japan.
India.
And
Interesting.
and in Instagram, United States 82.4%, but in Nigeria 2.6%. So I mean, I'd say we're pretty reaching. I think we're going international there for a second.
Yeah, I think we're going international, but I think it's important not to get too bogged down on how far we're reaching, because ultimately it really doesn't matter who we're reaching if they aren't going to sit here and give us feedback or know what we're talking about in general. Like I said earlier, we need to make sure we remain relevant to our audience who is here and is experiencing the things that we're writing about.
And I mean, with that, do you guys have any final comments to add? Any questions to ask? Whatever. This is your guys' time. Do you want to ask anything to the audience to appeal? Whatever.
I would just like to talk about our bond as a staff and who we are as the Observer. I think we've kind of talked about that this whole podcast, but I just want to say I'm really happy that I get to work with a big group of people like you guys, and I have been for the past almost 2 years. It's really been an honor to work alongside some very hardworking people who are passionate about what we do, who might not know a lot about this field, but are willing to learn and willing to dive in head first. Especially with our travel opportunities has been really interesting to learn from. We traveled to Washington, D.C. in October, end of October, early November, and then San Francisco, what was that, 2 weeks ago? For these big journalism conferences. And I think like Eric attended both, Indy attended both, and they both got to experience a lot of professionalism within the journalism world and the field because of just who we were around. It was that environment, but also they just dove right in. They networked, they talked to people that we probably wouldn't have been able to talk to if we stayed in Elgin. But I just think that really speaks to us as a staff because of how hardworking we are, how willing we are to go talk to other people, to travel and try new things, whether that's within touring wherever we're at something we're not necessarily used to, like that ghost tour we did, or whether that's just going and sitting front row in one of the classes to learn from one great professional photographer, writer, whoever that may be.
With that being our last topic of discussion for today, I'd like to thank Dom for coming onto the podcast and Indy for taking time out of her day to attend the podcast as well. Thank you to our listeners back wherever you guys are, home, in the car, and etc. Indy, I'm thanking you in advance for editing this podcast episode, and the other podcast episodes are going to be released. To learn more about The Observer and to see our work, visit elginobserver.com and follow us on Instagram at Observer Newspaper and on TikTok as well at Elgin Observer. Until next time, I'm Vanch, and that's Eric. We'll see you next time.